Hello, I'm Caroline Cabrera, Director of Education for OMiami. The Greenhouse Teachers Lab is brought to you by OMiami. These modules aim to provide teachers with creative writing strategies supported by a trauma-informed lens. Through projects, events, and publishing, we create a platform for amplifying Miami's people, investing in a new shared narrative of our city and a more equitable picture of its future. We believe that art and self-expression should be equally available to every Miamian. In this module, poet, hip-hop artist, and educator Marnino Toussaint and licensed psychotherapist and board-certified art therapist Aliyah Khalaf provide students some helpful techniques for revision.
Hello, Marnino. I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about writing and revising.
All right, so let's do it. What are the keys to revising, right? It's being clear, coherent, musical, and impactful. So the only thing I think we can do is start with some quotes and get everybody ready for what we're about to do. So first quote, "Art is never finished, it's only abandoned," by Leonardo da Vinci.
That's awesome. My quote is very simple, "No bad parts," by Richard Schwartz, and it's based on this idea that our mind has different parts, there are different parts of us, but none of those parts are inherently bad or negative.
And so with the idea of like no parts of us being bad or negative, right? We want to talk about how you can nurture a piece versus how you can pick apart a piece, right? Which, you know, as I was gonna say as a writer, but as people, right? It's really difficult to like differentiate the two and you know, step into that part of the process. But nurturing is essentially remembering that healthy things grow, right? And with things growing, you have to water it. And sometimes there's dry seasons and sometimes it's amazing, but none of it is wrong. All of it is part of the process of something becoming its full thing, right?
I love that. Healthy things grow. And if we look at the other side, if we're going in to pick something apart, to find the flaws, we're just intentionally trying to find the problem with something, prioritizing the final perfect product instead of the process.
Yeah. And I guess it doesn't always have to be perfect, right?
Right, absolutely. And so at this point, it's good to start being mindful of triggers, noticing if students are getting activated, if there are any signs of fight or flight, and just being mindful, noticing that as we start the exercise.
All right, so let's get into step one. The first thing that you have to do is have something to revise. So step one is to review your work. Have students come with a poem that was either written in a past module or something that was written outside this space, and read it through. Bring it to the front of mind, see it, right?
Okay, awesome. And so now that you have your poem, and as we're transitioning to step two, we want to start being mindful of inner critics and how they show up. Inner critics show up differently for different people. For some of us, it's about procrastinating, being a perfectionist, or just plain old self-sabotage. And so being mindful of this helps us because instead of fighting the inner critic and giving it more energy by fighting it, we want to collaborate with it or pick up tools and strategies to cope with inner criticism. And so what are some of those tools? We can prioritize compassion, reminding students and knowing that everybody makes mistakes and that it's totally okay. Prioritizing the process over the product. So we're not looking for the perfect end result or the perfect poem. We are enjoying the moment and enjoying the journey as we go along. Asking for help is always okay, especially around difficult or sensitive topics. And finally, being realistic about what are we trying to achieve, breaking up huge goals into smaller, doable tasks. And so those are some of the tools that we can have to cope with inner criticism.
So I have a question. I struggle with that, like being compassionate with myself. Like I hate making mistakes, like it makes me want to like cringe. So what would you say about somebody who's struggling with being compassionate in that moment?
I think that's great. And the first thing I would say is it's good that we can name it. So first of all, saying I struggle with making mistakes, and then maybe picking up some affirmations, some sort of mantras that you can repeat to yourself in moments that are challenging. Things like, it's not my fault, I am okay as I am, and repeating those affirmations can add a new positive voice to sort of mitigate some of the self-criticism.
All right, so let's go into step three, review. This is your moment to actually get things down on the paper. Pull out highlighters, pens, whatever you can, underline, whatever you can do to see these things. And we're gonna go from top to bottom. The first thing is your title. Is your title attracting readers and your audience? But we can even go deeper and think about, is your title doing the job that you want it to do? Is it having the impact you want it to have? Second thing, clarity, coherence, musicality, impact, right? Is it touching on all of those things? Is it clear what you're trying to tell people? Is it coherent, right? If you have rhymes in it, like, does your rhymes flow in? Does it have musicality to it? And like I said about the title, and like that follows along with the whole thing. What is your intention? Are you being impactful? All of that, right? The next thing, cliches. How can you take the cliches out and bring freshness into your poem? So do you have an example of a cliche we could use?
Cliche, how about glass half full?
Glass half full. So, super used, you know what I'm saying? And while, you know, there's always gonna be some of those things, and sometimes you can be intentional with the use of something that is overused, but in other times, sometimes we're just, you know, we're stopping right there, like where there's a block, and it's like, maybe if you move this block, you'll find something else fresher and newer there. And then my favorite one is using senses in your poem, making sure that people can feel, taste, touch, hear, all of the things that your poem does. It should invite people in to not just be reading or hearing it, but to actually be experiencing it. Cool. So now with that, we'll go into step 4, revision. You have these things highlighted. You read your poem. You're making sure that you're looking at it from a trauma-informed perspective. And so now, one of the things we want to think about is experimenting with verbs. How can you shift? Like I said this, I love the word fresh. Like, I think like fresh is the best idea, or the best way to express what like I think a poem should be. And so instead of saying something like run, can you say they floated? And now I can see the way they ran instead of just using that verb, the first verb that we found, right?
Okay, awesome. And I like the idea of verbs too, because there's a sense of taking action, movement, and agency in changing verbs. Going next into tense. So trying to find different senses, we're thinking about past, present, and future. And I think of it as a sort of superpower, really, because many times when it comes to mental health challenges, if we think of PTSD, if we think of depression, that's past-oriented. So there might be a sense of being stuck in the past and a memory. When we think of anxiety, it's future-oriented, thinking about the future or being scared of what's going to happen next. And if we think about the present, it's being here, now, it's being grounded. So if you're writing a poem and playing between these different tenses, it's like this superpower of you can change time and you can be here as well.
Right. And, you know, I think that goes back into what I was saying also about like the senses, right? The same thing with tenses, right? And it's the idea that when you do that, you're inviting somebody into that moment more as well. The next thing, changing point of view, same thing. How can you look at the poem from a different place, whether it be from your own vantage point or somebody else's?
Awesome. And so when you're changing point of view, you're looking at it potentially from a third person perspective. So you're kind of watching it as a movie, knowing that there are other characters involved as well. The next thing that we can consider is cutting out. So when you're revising, are there things that you want to remove? Are there things you want to undo, erase, or cancel? And here there's a kind of nuance. You can remove something in a way that's destructive, or you can remove something mindfully because you don't like it there. And I kind of compare it to this metaphor of you can either hack down the whole tree, or you can choose what you want to prune as terms of like weeds in your garden.
Yep. And, you know, I think about like what we talked about earlier, with me, right? Like I would erase important key things. And you know, like I think that's even an idea of a practice that you can use, right? Something to consider is why erase? Maybe move it to the side, right? Because it could be useful. So the next thing, line breaks. And this is for more advanced audiences. How can you look at the beginning and end of sentences and make them do things that surprise the readers and the audience, right? And the last thing, I've been saying it's my favorite, everything's my favorite, guy. Make things concrete. Instead of talking about love or saying love and saying hate and saying these feelings, how can you show it? How can you make it a concrete thing?
I think that's a really important point, especially if we think of adversity, making something concrete and real. Many times when we experience trauma, we might feel disconnected, numb, or dissociated, but making something concrete and real is like kind of saying it's real, it happened, it's in the past, this is who I really am now.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think about like obviously we're talking about being aware of our traumas, but what would you say about the use of being concrete in the poem for like your own like uses, like putting down your feelings and making sure that like these are being specific to you? Like what would you say, like how can that be helpful or even harmful maybe?
I think it kind of leans more towards the helpful or useful side, because every time you're putting something on the page, you're externalizing it. So there's a safe distance, it's out there and it's real, instead of keeping it in and not knowing for sure or feeling confused. And so there's a sense of sharing inherently in doing that.
All right, so let's get into step 5, feedback. So what we're doing right here, right? Working collaboratively with somebody else, peer to peer, and helping them, like having them bring their perspective into your piece to help it grow. Considerations for teachers, whatever your classroom allows, right? So maybe it's one-on-one like us, or maybe it's within group, but either way, it's really important to have that perspective shared. But it's also important to stress that feedback is not a personal attack. It's just an opportunity to collaborate, right? And then step 6, finalize. And by finalize, I mean pause, because we talked about it. Healthy things grow. We're gonna keep saying it. And what that means is that maybe this is where this piece rests for now until you're ready to revisit it another time. And so being sure that it's clear, coherent, sometimes musical, and has impact. And another consideration for teachers, it's really easy when you have an example of things. So if you have a piece that was revised by somebody else, showing what it looked like before and showing the process, even showing the middle process, right? Like that thing that's exciting, showing the X's and the highlights and all of that, and then showing like what it looks like at the end can be really helpful.
And just a closing remark as we conclude this module, that so many times there are negative associations and automatic associations when it comes to criticism and revising. It can be associated with judgment and shame, power dynamics of who's reviewing whose work. And what we're trying to do here is to reframe that and have a sort of empowering stance when it comes to revising our own work in a way that prioritizes processing and growth over perfectionism and finality. And on that note, remember to check out our downloadable worksheet. Thank you, Marnino. It was a pleasure doing this with you.
Thank you, Elia. And really excited. Hope this was helpful for you all. And let's get to revising. Yeah.